Number 44, in North American forests, two species of birds, nuthatches and brown creepers, forage on the same trees for insects. Brown creepers feed on insects found near the bottom of the tree trunk, while nuthatches feed on insects in the top part of the tree. The difference in foraging behavior most likely affects the nuthatches and brown creepers by... Okay. So, nuthatches, top of the tree, brown creepers, bottom of the tree. They both eat the same insects, but he eats them off the top, he eats them off the bottom. Allowing the insects to avoid many types of predators, all right, is that the difference in foraging behavior? Okay, I should say. That difference in foraging most likely affects. Okay, so let's read the options. The question's a little vague. Allowing the birds to avoid many types of predators, reducing competition between the birds for resources, preventing the birds from interbreeding with each other, and establishing dominance between the birds for nesting sites. So this different foraging behavior affects the nuthatches and brown creepers. They eat the same insects, but these guys at the top and these guys at the bottom. They are in competition because they're eating the same insects, but we've reduced that competition because they eat that behavior. Some eat the top of the tree, some eat the bottom of the tree. So we're reducing the competition between the birds for resources so that they can actually coexist. All right. Number 45. Fruits grown in hot climates are usually less sweet than those grown in colder climates. The high temperatures increase the rate of respiration in the plants, thus reducing the sugar content in some fruits. Why does increased respiration in leaves and stem reduce sugar contents in the fruits of plants? That's a good question. So let's consider our options. The chloroplasts move from the fruits to the leaves and stems to provide energy for respiration. Okay. Chloroplasts do not usually go to the fruits. Okay, chloroplasts move from the fruits to the leaves and stems to provide energy for respiration. That doesn't really make sense. Why chloroplasts move from fruits? Chloroplasts are in the leaves and stems, mostly in the leaves. I don't know why they do the moving thing, so that doesn't make much sense. The flow of nutrients shifts from the phloem to the xylem. No. Phloem is the only thing that transports nutrients. There's no changing it to the xylem. So that's definitely the wrong answer. Sugars are moved from the fruits to the roots for storage. Usually if we're going to store in the roots, it goes directly from the leaves. So that's a little hesitant to shoot that one. Sugars produced in the leaves, yes, that is true, sugars are produced in leaves, are used as energy sources instead of being stored in fruits. Let's see, that makes good sense. So, the sugars that are produced in the leaves, they can be used for either energy or be stored in the fruits. Now, that energy source helps growth. And these plants grow very, very fast. Okay? The high temperatures increase the rate of respiration in cells. Increase the rate of respiration, which is that cellular respiration using sugar for energy, using the sugar rather than storing the sugar. So if the sugar is used rather than stored, that's what's going on. That was a plenty confusing question, but the answer, if you understand plants and fruits, that energy isn't quite too complicated. Okay. this model of the cell, number 46. This model of the cell cycle includes 2 arrows that each represent a process in the cycle. All right, so cell cycle G1, S, G2, and there's 1 arrow. Arrow 1. And then we have this much shorter arrow 2. And if you look at it carefully, it's kind of hard to see, but this is G1, S, G2, and this has 1, 2, 3, 4 stages in it. Okay? What do the 2 arrows represent? Well, hopefully you remember your cell cycle. G1, S, and G2 all together, we call that interphase. And when interphase is over, we have mitosis, which is the dividing of the cell before the cell cycle starts over at interphase. So, arrow 1 represents interphase and arrow 2 represents mitosis. The answer is unquestionably H. Arrow 2 mitosis, arrow 1 interphase. Number 47, which statement explains how producers are dependent upon consumers for their survival? All right. Producers, consumers. If you don't remember what those words are, this question is going to get really confusing. Producer means they make their own food by way of photosynthesis. We are talking about plants. Whereas consumers eat their food. And this can be either... So consumers eat their food. So we're talking like animals. Animals and some others, you can consider them. So we'll just put animals there. So explain how producers are dependent upon consumers. Now you can see where consumers are dependent on producers because the consumers often eat the plants. But how do the plants depend on the animals for their survival? Okay, so consumers supply oxygen for producers to undergo aerobic respiration. So consumers produce carbon dioxide during photosynthesis. Consumers provide chemical energy for producers' cellular respiration, make lactic acid. Okay, so if you look at the answers, we're talking about photosynthesis, cellular respiration cycle. So, from the notes, the plant, the cow, that repeating cycle. The plant provides oxygen and sugar in the form of glucose, and the animal will exhale the carbon dioxide and pee out the water. And we keep cycling through that over and over and over again. Okay, carbon cycle. So, consumers supply the oxygen. So here we have producers, consumers. Who's supplying the oxygen? Supplying the oxygen. All right, that's the producers. Producers supply the oxygen, so the answer is not A. Consumers produce carbon dioxide. Yes, they do. For the producers to use during photosynthesis. Producers do photosynthesis. Absolutely. That is our answer. Okay, Let's look at the others just so we understand them. Consumers provide chemical energy. Consumers don't provide chemical energy. This right here is chemical energy. It's your food. All right? Chemical energy, aka food. All right, so food goes from the producers to the consumers. The producers provide the chemical energy. These do not have energy. This has energy. Okay, so that's not it. All right, consumers make lactic acid that producers use in photosynthesis. Lactic acid has everything to do with, stays within the organism. All right, so that's number 47. Number 48, which of these describes the difference between viruses and cells? So, viruses, cells, the difference. All right, so, I mean, I could start doing a whole bunch of notes, and we have those Venn diagrams that we've done in viruses and cells. Okay, so let's focus on what they do have in common, because that's very little. Viruses and cells, they both have nucleic acid. Okay, actually, let's do this. Venn diagram, virus, cell, all right, nucleic acid. That's something they have in common, okay, which is genetic information, your DNA or RNA. Because see, a virus will have one or the other, a cell will have both. Which of these describes the difference? So a cell contains protein and viruses only contain carbohydrates. That is incorrect. A virus is made of a protein coat. There's a protein coat called a capsid that surrounds that DNA. So, viruses have a flagella. No, viruses don't have a flagella. Okay, cells will have flagella or cilia, if they have one or the other. Cells reproduce independently, and viruses require a host to reproduce. Ding, 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 ding. Viruses need host to reproduce. Cells do not. Okay? Viruses have membranes made of proteins. Membranes made of nucleic acid. Well, cells' membranes are made out of lipids. Right there. I wouldn't really call it a membrane. We'd call it a coat. Whatever. There you go. Number 49. As part of the nitrogen cycle, animals acquire some amino acids by doing which of the following? How do animals get amino acids, aka protein, from which they get their nitrogen? Well, they eat plants. Okay, so that source of nitrogen for humans comes from eating the plants. Okay. Which two body systems must directly interact for vertebrate organisms to exchange gases? All right. Exchange gases. All right, so this is definitely like the lungs, aka respiratory system. So that's definitely got to be the first one. Then you got to pay attention to what other options there are. So let's look for respiratory system in the answers. Skeletal, muscular, blah, 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 blah. Ooh, respiratory. Ding, 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 ding. Okay, so respiratory system. Woohoo! Now, does the circulatory system, which has the blood through which the gas moves? Absolutely. So the circulatory system exchanges the carbon dioxide for oxygen in the cells, and then it gets that blood goes to the lungs, and they exchange it in reverse. So there we go. That's definitely how that works. If you don't know what I'm talking about, look for a video that shows about how the respiratory system takes in oxygen, puts it in the blood takes that oxygen to all the cells in the body, drops off the oxygen, picks up the carbon dioxide, takes that carbon dioxide back to the lungs, where the lungs release it into the atmosphere and pick up more oxygen. Question number 51. The image shows parts of humerus bone in different genera of primates. Okay, here we go. Gorilla, Pongopan, Savipithecus. All right, these are different primates. Monkeys. All right. Which statement is best supported by the observable structures of the different humerus bones? Notice all very similar structures. All very similar structures in different species. Hopefully that's ringing a bell in your mind. All right. About evolution. Okay. Similar structures. This is what we call structural homologies. And that's because they share a common ancestor. Because this is evidence of evolution. And in evolution, we all eventually evolve from the same common ancestor. Aha. Number 52. Okay, mutations. All right, these mutation questions can be a little challenging. You just have to have patience with them. A certain mutation in the gene for hemoglobin results in the red blood cells becoming sticky, rigid, and irregular shaped. These irregular shaped red blood cells block the flow of blood through the body. A single base mutation is responsible for these irregular shaped blood cells. So, normal gene, GAG and CTC, so G was C, A to T, C to G. Mutation, GC is the same, TA is switched, GC. So right here is the mutation. All right. And so we end up with that GUG sequence, which gives us valine for an amino acid, and whereas the original has glutamine for the amino acid. So what type of mutation is this? All right, we didn't insert an extra nucleotide. We didn't delete a nucleotide. We didn't duplicate a nucleotide. We substituted. What was anyways, we substituted. So that idea of that AT pair now became a TA pair. So substitution. All right, 53. A partial food web is shown. Okay, so it's a pretty good looking food web. Lots of information there. Based on the food web, which organisms are direct sources of energy for secondary consumers? First, we have to identify our secondary consumers. So if you remember the whole pyramid thing, we have the producers, we have the primary consumers. These are your herbivores because they eat the producers, which are the plants. Okay. Then we have the secondary consumers, which are usually your omnivores, usually, okay, because they're eating both these and these, but they're definitely eating your primary consumers. And then you have your tertiary consumers, okay, which usually eat the secondary consumers. These are usually your carnivores. All right. So, based on this food web, which organisms are direct sources of energy? So, a direct source of energy for the secondary consumers. So, secondary consumers, all right, they'll get direct sources of energy. It's whatever they eat. So, whatever is being eaten by a secondary consumer. So, first we have to find the secondary consumers. So, let's identify our producers. Okay, so up here, let's do this. Let's label them producer, primary, secondary. All right, like that. So P for producer. Berries are a producer. Seeds, producer. They come from plants. Those are the only two producers. Primary consumers eat those things. So rabbit, this is a primary consumer. A mouse, it's a primary consumer. Grasshopper, okay. It's a primary consumer. He's eating both the berries and the seeds. The butterfly is a primary consumer. The aphid is a primary consumer, okay. Now, the bird is a primary consumer, but it'll also eat the ladybug. All right, so that kind of pushes him more towards the idea. Okay, so we're not going to quite label him there. We're going to look at that. Consider that for a moment. Because that makes him an omnivore, because he's eating a bug and a plant. Okay? So, secondary consumers. Who eats these primary consumers? We're going to look at that first. All right? So, the mouse is getting eaten by the fox and the hawk. Those are both carnivores, so maybe not quite so much. The grasshopper gets eaten by the frog. Okay? The aphid gets eaten by the ladybug. The butterfly gets eaten by the frog. Okay, so right now we're looking so far ladybug, frog, hawk, and fox. Now, which organisms are direct energy sources for secondary consumers? Secondary consumers eat primary consumers. So the direct source of energy for a secondary consumer is usually a primary consumer. So let's see if we can find our list of primary consumers. Is an aphid, a bird, and a rabbit a possibility? Yeah, because technically that bird is a primary consumer because it is eating the berries. The ladybug, the fox, the dragonfly. Okay. If you look at the dragonfly, so this would be like a secondary consumer, tertiary, that'd make him more of a tertiary consumer. So not so much. The frog, he is a secondary consumer. He's not a source of energy for a secondary consumer. So he's secondary. Butterfly is a primary. Berries are a producer. That's totally not making any sense. Okay. Mouse, snake, and hawk. The hawk and snake are secondary or tertiary consumers, depending on how you look at them. And so they're not going to be food for a secondary consumer. Okay? So secondary consumers, again, they eat primary consumers or they eat producers. So, back up here. Aphid is a primary consumer. Bird's a primary consumer. Rabbit's a primary consumer. That makes all of those food for a secondary consumer. So, yeah, that's definitely your best answer. And last one. Question 54. different levels of biological organization. Okay, order of organizations. So we have here an organism, a single living thing. Here we have a lot of organisms of the same species. If they're all the same species, this is a population. All right, we have many species living together. This is a community. So, orders of levels of organization. This is an organism population community. And they're basically testing if you know the difference between a population and community, which many of you got wrong. That is the review of the benchmark.